Okay, I'm here with Eric Chewning from Huntington Ingalls Industries. And Eric's had an amazing career across investment banking, consulting, working in the Pentagon on industrial-based policy and for SecDef, and then most recently in an important leadership position at HII. So building some aircraft carriers, some submarines, some destroyers, and some unmanned systems. And very excited for this conversation. We're going to talk about their deal with Hyundai, with the Koreans. We're going to talk about what I didn't know is they're actually the largest producer in the world of unmanned undersea vehicles, which is super exciting. We're going to talk about the defense budget, the policy environment, and especially about the workforce. There's a ton of discussion here around outsourcing their labor force, building aircraft carriers more efficiently, getting their existing workers, their welders, their fitters, more productive in the yard, and then distributing that work from modules out around the United States into some great parts of the American industrial base, especially in South Carolina. So I'm really excited for this discussion. I think y'all will like it, and thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Fleet, where we engage the people, voices, and ideas behind America's maritime reboot at the intersection of technology and manufacturing. I'm Tim Glenatzis, and I've been building ships for the U.S. Navy and the commercial market for 25 years. You'll be led today by Austin Gray, former Navy intelligence officer and co-founder of Blue Water Autonomy. From amphibs to destroyers, and now the unmanned warships of the U.S. Navy's future fleet, it's time for some shipbuilding.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Fleet. We're here with Eric Chewning from HII. Eric, let's just go straight into the classic Rebuilding the Fleet question. What are you doing to build American sea power?
Sure. No, that's awesome. Well, Austin, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you. So HII is America's largest military shipbuilder, right? And every part of our company touches American maritime power. So our largest division, Newport News, is responsible for all the aircraft carrier new construction, aircraft carrier refueling. And they also, in partnership with General Dynamics Electric Boat, are responsible for our submarine forces, construction of our submarine forces. Our second division, Ingalls, down in Mississippi, is the largest provider of large surface combatants. So think destroyers and amphibs. And we have Mission Technologies, which is our division based here in McLean, Virginia, which contributes a significant amount of unmanned undersea vehicles for the U.S. Navy. So we've delivered over 750 globally. And so that's an important part of the business we don't talk much about.
750 UUVs?
750 UUVs globally, yeah.
Okay. Is it like the Lionfish and Remus?
That's the Lionfish program and the Remus family of vehicles. That's correct.
You differentiate there. One's a program, whereas the other one is a family of vehicles.
That's right, yeah. And Remus is a really good example. So we were actually the first company to successfully transition a DIU program into a Navy program of record. And so it started with Remus.
How long did that take?
It took a couple of years, but we initially started with our Remus product, which was a commercially derived UUV that eventually became the Lionfish program for the U.S. Navy.
Where do those launch from? Do they go to torpedo tubes or
so
drop over the side of a boat?
It's cool. So you've got a lot of options with those. So you can. We have a product called the Yellow Moray, which is a capability we developed with HII, which you're able to launch and recover a UUV out of a torpedo tube. Which, as you might imagine, is a game-breaking technological capability. But depending upon the size of the Remus, so they're everything from our Remus 100 to the Remus 6000. You can launch them by hand for the smaller ones. The larger ones you would launch off of any kind of platform. I was actually at our unmanned business in Massachusetts yesterday, and the team was showing me they've developed a capability where you can go on a ship, launch it off the back of a ship, and then recover it autonomously on the back of a ship as well. So
that's pretty sweet. Yeah, I saw the Navy testing some USV and UUV recovery tech off of the back of the stiletto that they keep at Carter Rock. It looked tough, even in like Sea State 2.
Yeah, but it's an awesome thing, and I think it gets this conversation as we think about the role of unmanned in the maritime force. The development of ConOps, right, are going to be critically important, and how we're all experimenting with how we move forward with those.
We're off script in going into the unmanned stuff quickly. Yeah. Right off the top, you guys are known for aircraft carriers, destroyers, big steel with nuclear power. Let's go back to the core here and talk. Let's talk workforce. How you're building it. I saw that y'all have recently, I think, correct me if these stats are wrong, doubled the outsourcing rate for workforce, and you're working on quadrupling it. What does that mean? how much of your workforce was outsourced in the beginning, and what's it
Sure.
going towards?
Yeah, and I wouldn't think about that as an outsource question. Think about it in terms of the amount of earnings that we're going to outsource, right? So it isn't necessarily that we're outsourcing labor; it's the full outsourcing work. And we're targeting 2 million hours of outsourced work in our shipyards this year, and we're going to go to 3 million hours next year.
And how many total hours in the shipyards?
So we don't talk about that too much publicly.
It's like tens of millions, or
yeah. So think about it that way, and then also think about it in terms of structurally. And I think this gets into an industry structure question for us as an industry. We need to rebuild the sub-tier of the industrial base, right? And an important way in which we're going to rebuild the sub-tier of the industrial base is by increasing the amount of work that we can outsource through our distributed shipbuilding plan, such that smaller yards can get a steady demand signal from the larger yards, and then that in turn enables them to hire the workforce, work on the material that they need, and that effectively grow the roots of the industrial base.
So that's working with smaller yards. So would your acquisition down in South Carolina, I think last year, would that fit into that strategy, or is that different?
Yeah, so I think like anybody, we got to figure out how we want to sort of create what we view as core versus what are the type of work we want to outsource. We acquired the assets W International, and then we closed on that earlier this year. The W facility was a great facility, and it's an example of us sort of making a choice around where we want to acquire work, where is there an existing workforce that we can expand our production. And so for us, it's both, right? We'll look at area opportunities where it makes sense to make an acquisition to expand capacity. We'll do that. In other instances, we'll work with outsourced partners. We've got 23 outsourced partners across the country.
On that note, I saw the announcement about Bro Brothers, your work with them. Some cool visuals y'all put out. Is that an example of like working with a small yard for outsourcing?
That would be another example, but that's an example of where we're doing it in the unmanned surface vehicle space. Yeah. And so, I like to think of ourselves as a really good industry partner, right? And so we've got a variety set of industry partnerships. Some of it is for outsourcing for work in the at Newport News and at Ingalls, and some of it is as our unmanned systems vehicle grows, looking for partners to work with in that respect as well.
So I'm glad we talked about outsourcing right up front. I just read a book called Heavy Metal about some of your work on the aircraft carriers. What's going on that yard building carriers? What are you working on modernizing there? How's the workforce doing?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that attracted me to HII specifically was the mission around how do we reindustrialize American manufacturing? Yeah. And I think folks are familiar with kind of the broad narrative that we've experienced as an industry, where at the end of the Cold War, there was a significant amount of consolidation. The supply base consolidated, and as we worked through that period, industry really never got back on scale. And then you had COVID, right? And COVID created a complex set of issues for us because it created supply chain issues for us, created workforce issues for us. And then as you have the confluence of supply chain and workforce issues, you get capacity issues because things stay in fixture longer. And as an industry, we're working through all those challenges now. We're taking the opportunity as we reset and work through those labor issues and material issues to then also address capacity, but then also make investments in different manufacturing process technologies to help with the efficiencies in the yard. And then, in addition, work on outsourcing. So, I would say that the challenges that we're working through, and we're making a significant amount of product improvements. We set a target for ourselves this year to get 15 to 20% improvement in throughput across the enterprise. We're on target to do that, and it's you just got to grind it out.
Yeah, I think about throughput. One other thing I read is y'all's backlog is like 4 times your so you guys pulling about $12 billion in revenue a year, maybe 4x backlog on that, so 40 to 50 billion in backlog. And it makes sense because they're massive orders for really big ships that take years, even decades to build. So will that throughput lower the backlog to revenue ratio, or will that just result in more business and faster business for you and your customers?
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way, right? We need to generate capacity for the warfighter. And so that's what we're focused on, right? So we need to generate capacity for the warfighter, which means we need to increase throughput so we can make our schedules and make our commitments to the Navy around getting capability in the hands of the fleet.
Last point on question from reading the book about building aircraft carriers, Heavy Metal. Talked a lot about the change orders the Navy sends down to you guys. And I think a lot of that was for maybe the first forward carrier. And so I understand, lead ship, there might be more change orders, but is that still a big problem? How are you dealing with it? Navy side, HII side?
Sure. I think that's just a nature of shipbuilding, right? That, you think of an aircraft carrier, right? It's not like you're doing serial production on a car, right? This is arguably the most complex capital project that one can undertake. And so as you're working through that, there's going to be changes, and then you've got to react to those changes you're making it. And so I think it's important as we think about reindustrialization for our industry, you've got to take the right analogs from other sectors, right? And so there's opportunities to use new technologies, there's opportunity to use different manufacturing skills, but you also sort of need to recognize the unique nature of shipbuilding. And you need to have the appropriate pattern recognition so you can kind of take what other people are doing well, but then also make the necessary adjustments.
Yeah. What's another industry you're watching closely to learn and apply?
Sure. So I think like everybody, we're looking at how do we apply AI into a manufacturing environment.
Yeah.
And earlier this year, I announced our partnership with C3 AI and our project we're doing initially around machine shop optimization. So how we can use that to improve throughput in our machine shops. Because machine shops feed the entire yards. And so lessons around how other legacy manufacturing environments have deployed AI are really important for us because, for those of you guys who have started this journey, it's a combination of not just getting the algorithm right and getting the data organized right, but it's also a significant change management approach, right? And how do you get changes down at the deck plate as you're initiating that? So lessons learned around how others have gone through that journey have been helpful for us. Yeah. The other thing I'm paying a lot of attention to is industry structure and how industry structure has evolved over time. And so when you think about, broadly speaking, U.S. shipbuilding outsources about 10%. So the main yards will outsource about 10% of what they do. Asian shipbuilders are closer to 40 or 50%. Like the commercial aerospace industry and auto industry, you'll have the primes will do on the order of 67% of their content. And so the other thing I look at heavy manufacturing is, what's the right level for us from an industry structure perspective? And this gets back to the earlier question around outsourcing. It says, listen, I know I need to increase the base more. I can do that through outsourcing. That'll change industry structure and enable me to then think about how I operate the yards differently in terms of what are they going to strategically focus on, and what are the types of things I need to be able to outsource. And that's going to be a long-term evolution, but I think it's the type of evolution we need to do to get, as a country, production to where we need it to be.
And what's in that reindustrialization theme? And for the audience, Eric and I reconnected at the Reindustrialize conference over the summer. It was a great event. Lots of urgency in the manufacturing and shipbuilding space. What's the toughest part of your supply chain right now?
So, so it's always a combination
Everyone's
of stuff,
favorite
right?
question.
Yeah. Well, and because there's elements of the supply chain that we know are perennial challenges like castings and forgings.
How much casting and forging do you guys do in-house, or is it all out?
So no, we do some of it in-house. And actually, the interesting story about Newport News. So Newport News was actually, the shipyard was put where it is because there was a casting house there first. It's actually built the shipyard around the castings. But when you think about the confluence of challenges we're working through now, 70% of our sequence critical material, so stuff that we have to buy that if it doesn't come in time will impact kind of a build schedule, are to sole source suppliers. So it just gives you a sense of the level of sub-tier supply-based consolidation that's occurred, right? So you run into sole-based supply chain issues, not just in one area, in multiple areas. We're addressing that in coordination with the Navy through kind of the MID program and what we're doing to build and qualify additional sources of supply. We're also using AUKUS as a mechanism for increasing diversity of our supply base. So we're running programs in Australia around qualifying Australian companies to contribute to the VCS supply chain specifically, because it helps
VCS?
Virginia-class submarine. Yeah, because what it'll do is then it will help Australian companies build the competencies that they need along the optimal pathway for their own Virginia-class program, and then ultimately SSN AUKUS build. And then we're also working with the United Kingdom on qualifying their suppliers to support. So recently announced some castings in the UK companies that we would qualify to do it. So, I think about the supply chain, and increasingly this is a allied based in conversation around what can we do to increase not only kind of what we're able to do here in the United States, but with key allies and partners, integrate the sub-tier.
Yeah, and your guys' supply chain for the submarines and the aircraft carriers is so specialized. And like I mean, that stat there really resonates with me. 70% are sole source is insane. Even for our work with a much more, I think, broad supply base option, we're still working with those exact same partners overseas.
Yeah,
because you need them.
You need them. We need to get scale, right? And this is a challenge that we're all working through together.
Yeah.
And so I think coordination on those issues becomes really important.
Yeah. Anything that you wish the MIB program or Blue Forge or those guys would do in addition to what they're already doing, besides more ads at football games?
I think it's important to think about this as a team approach, right? And so we're all focused on how do we make sure that we're able to identify where there's an issue, get resourcing into that issue, and then expand the supply chain where it needs to get expanded. An important piece of that also is private capital, right? So it isn't just sort of exercising MIB funding, but as private equity and other sources of capital come into the ecosystem, what are we doing to work with them in a way where it's targeted and it'll have the most effect? And so again, as I kind of think about the supply base in general, this is like an all hands on deck kind of moment for us. And I'm mindful that we've got a lot of private capital coming into the sector. You've got government capital, you've got foreign direct investment as well, right? And so, the Make America Shipbuilding Great Again kind of rider to the U.S. Korea trade agreement, I think is another good example of that. And so then as all this capital comes into the sector, in addition to the VC money that goes into more of the defense tech ecosystem, how do we make sure it's coming in a way that ultimately enhances and strengthens the industry?
Yeah, so we'll go into some of the international work, both your work with Koreans and I think the icebreaker deal is really interesting later in the episode. But I wanted to ask you a little about, this is a good segue, of the capital and your comment on the location of, hey, here's why our shipyard is where it is because of you said it because of a casting.
It was the original castings house was there. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. So I've observed that there's a couple strong arguments for setting up greenfield yards, right? These California Forever guys doing a greenfield yard. A couple other ideas out there, but location matters a lot in shipbuilding. So we, at one point, had many hundreds of yards in the U.S. Now we still have, I think, at least 100 good operational yards. So Matt Paxton was in here last week. I think he said 135, and they obviously would have taken the best locations, right? The places, on the right bays, at the good points in the rivers where you can build ships. Why should someone go start a new shipyard at a location that isn't, it wasn't already selected when there are all these great American yards that you could just lay down more capital on?
Yeah. So I think.
And is there even an argument for greenfield?
Yeah. So I think right now we're in an argument that says, hey, I want as much capacity in the system as I can get, and so whether that's expansion of existing facilities. As you indicated, there are a lot of brownfield facilities that were shuttered at the end of the Cold War that we could look at and reactivate.
There's stuff that was shuttered after World War I. Then there's stuff shuttered after World War II.
That's
and
right.
Then there's the stuff shuttered after the Cold War.
Because you think about the sort of the prime of U.S. shipbuilding was World War and then World War II, right? And so you've had this sort of degradation in shipbuilding capacity here in the United States. So there's brownfield facilities, obviously a lot on the East Coast, but you've got them in the West and you've got them on the Gulf Coast. And then you've got these opportunities for greenfield investment as well. What I think what's great about the private capital coming into the system is private capital is going to be smart, and they're going to pick places where there's the best business case for how expansion and where that'll have the greatest impact. What we can do is, as we think about underwriting business cases for that, is provide outsourcing volume as a way of reducing risk. And as you indicated, there's a backlog there, so you can give folks visibility into a significant amount of outsourcing volume. And so the conversations we have with new capital into the sector is, let's pick locations where we're not, because labor force is also an important equivalent to that, right? So if you put a bunch of shipyards right next to each other, you're cannibalizing the same labor force.
Yeah, exactly.
Which and Americans don't travel the way don't geographically relocate the way they once did for jobs. And so putting everything in one area isn't necessarily a resilient strategy. So how do we make sure we're distributing the capital and finding the work in places where we're not cannibalizing workforce, We're putting in place capacity that can be put to use as quickly as possible. And candidly, that was part of the math we did in the W acquisition was, we did
which is in South Carolina,
which is in South Carolina, where we had a workforce that was available, an existing facility, and we did the basic, build versus buy math that said, am I better off trying to establish a new facility somewhere, or should I just go ahead and acquire something that already exists? And it was clearly my flash to bang was going to be a lot better if I could find an existing facility with a workforce where I wasn't going to cannibalize kind of my existing team. So that I think it's all those sets of trades that are really important. What I will say is I have run into problems, as I've looked at outsourcing additional volume, where I'll make calls into other yards and, we may need to, increase the strength of a pier or get some capital improvements done for us to be able to barge work in and out. And then environmental remediation, permitting timelines, those are still years, right? And so if you
even in South Carolina.
This particular example wasn't in South Carolina, but you think about the role of permitting and how that prevents us from going faster, right? I think we need to take a hard look, and I've said this in a couple of different forums where, as we think about reauthorization of the Defense Production Act, right? Why don't we think about the opportunity to help use that?
Did that lapse?
To fast track.
I can't remember.
So it was supposed to lapse, and they reauthorized it, but they reauthorized it with the authorities that it had before. But I think thinking about a relaunch of the DPA to address some of these issues like permitting, from a policy perspective would help.
That's what I think is tough about Northern California is it's a really tough permitting environment and it's expensive labor. Everything's expensive, right? Even getting gas or groceries is expensive up there. The flip side is you've got yards like Philly, right? Philadelphia is like a top 10 American city by population. You have a large labor force, lots of young people you can train up, right? So maybe there's an argument for having one or two more yards that are kind of on the outskirts of major population centers, very different than some of the yards we operate down in, the Gulf, which are, you have New Orleans down there, but it's nowhere near the size of a, 10 million person metro area like Philly.
Yeah, I think this question is one that sort of touches the broader reindustrialized question we have as a country that says, listen, where does it make sense for me to do manufacturing, right? And the things that drive manufacturing costs, right? What's the cost of energy? What's the availability of the workforce? How can new technologies adjust the math around those things? Where do I have an existing footprint that it makes sense from a logistics and supply chain perspective for me to feed?
Yeah.
I think that shipbuilding is unique in that it's obviously, to your earlier point, there are existing areas that were put in place, at the founding of the country, and those places have stayed, important areas of shipbuilding, the Southeast around Hampton Roads, Charleston, the Gulf Coast, obviously New England.
We have a yard right in Boston.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so it's just, and there's great, and that's the thing about shipbuilding, right? You will find workers that are there and have been there for generations, right? And then it is a generational thing. These are fixtures, their communities, all that's critically important. And then as we think about expanding capacity, I think there'll be a logical case to make that, expansion of where things go, like the Great Lakes is an area that, is an untapped shipbuilding ecosystem. And then it just becomes a question of what work makes sense to put there. And then if it's going to be part of an outsourcing plan, how do you get it to one of the larger yards so it can get incorporated into a final stage?
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen with Frigate?
I'm not going to comment on any other programs.
Okay. There's a question later in the rapid fire round about what's your program to watch. So we'll come back. We'll circle back. Yeah. So on the workforce thing, and you keep mentioning new tech. You talked about AI as an important thing you want to integrate into the yards.
Yeah.
There are some software companies out there that are portraying themselves as shipbuilding companies. They're not building any ships. Software is an important way to increase productivity, right, in yards or really in anything we do. Is there any software implementation that you're using in the yards right now to increase productivity that you're really excited about? Do you want to highlight?
In a bunch of different contexts, right? So I think in terms of how we're using software with respect to increasing our own productivity, you know what I mean? I think we're, like a lot of folks, on an Industry 4.0 journey, right? Where, and I think when we started, we were probably at Industry 1.5. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so now it's a question of how are we using not just software, but it's that full integrated set of tools, right? So digital engineering, how's my digital engineering? Where am I creating digital twins? How are those digital twins informing my build process?
How solid are your digital twins now?
Depends on the program, right? And then it depends on the maturity of how things evolved based on the requirements that the U.S. government kind of had, right? And some of these programs are legacy programs that have older, things that weren't yet invented yet, right? Whereas others are fully digital designs.
With all the change order, the change order problem is like, if you have a digital design, it's a lot easier to go and make some changes in the digital thing, and then if that can be made in the physical world, let it flow down.
Right.
And if it can't, just hold it.
Yeah, but that, I think that gets to the kind of this, in my mind, this idea around like shipbuilding is I'll say it has been slower to adopt a lot of these technologies than, say, commercial aerospace.
Yeah.
Right. And so, part of our challenge right now, but it's also an opportunity, is as we're addressing the supply base issues, as we're addressing the capacity issues, as we're addressing the workforce issues, there's another opportunity around a whole technology refresh. Right, technology refresh in terms of how we conduct manufacturing, technology refresh in terms of how programs are operated. I think in the unmanned space, right, there's an opportunity to potentially go faster with the digital twin environment, with sort of a full set of digital design tools. And then you can do a clean sheet on a manufacturing process in a digital environment, right, in ways that a shipyard that's been around for 140 years can't. Yep. And I think that type of federated experimentation is really important because it's going to inform each other as we kind of move forward.
Yeah, one hypothesis I have about the unmanned ships is that their product velocity needs to be higher than those of a human crewed ship, because on the human crewed ship, we, the humans, are there to keep changing how it's used, right?
Yeah.
But for the uncrewed vessel, you literally have to have the vessel get smarter over time, or it's going to be dead in the water.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, just by virtue of, if we're going to use them to be attritable or expendable, then you're going to need to consume them more. Yeah. So you're going to want higher production volumes as you can get it. And that's part of the point of an unmanned system, right? Is that if I don't have to account for all of the things that a crew bakes into a platform,
all the life support,
it should be simpler, faster, right? Survivability requirements are less. I should be able to produce it quicker.
Yeah. So there's some interesting language. I think the Senate Armed Services NDAA put in there about tech warrant holders don't get to oversee unmanned the same way. And I think only the tech warrant holder for cybersecurity, for ordnance, and then maybe for one other, I'm blanking on the third one, but one other, pretty safety important one, like weapon system, I think it was. Those guys still get to do their jobs, but the rest, they don't. Do you think that language makes sense? Are the tech warrant holders where we should be peeling it back, or are there other areas?
I think broadly speaking, if we're going to move to a sort of an all-domain force, which I think we are, where you're going to have both manned and unmanned systems operating together, to get the benefit of having an unmanned capability operating in the context of a manned force, we need to treat it differently in a variety of contexts, right? You need to treat it differently in terms of how we operate it, how we build it, how we fight it, how we sustain it. And so I think baking in that difference on the front end is really important. Where I'm really thinking through the problem set now is the con ops around how those things are going to operate together in the context of an existing fleet. Yeah. Right. And then how will a larger, because you mentioned MASC as an example, right? How will a MASC type platform operate in the context of a surface action group or a carrier strike group? Right. It's a very different type of operating environment in terms of like integration than, say, the Ukrainians taking a jet ski and MacGyvering something to it. Yeah. You know what I mean? In the Black Sea, right? And so, and while that's great and that's cool, and I think we all should be looking at that level of innovation, we also need to recognize that the types of unmanned problem sets we're going to face, some of them will be the same and some will be different.
That's why the U.S. is moving out on the MASC stuff. I was in Ukraine 2 years ago, and I was like, "This is dope. We need to apply it to the Indo-PACOM size problem set."
Yeah, and I think the opportunity to innovate. I always think about like modernization of the force usually comes down to like 4 different things all needing to be present. Right? You need funding, you need acquisition, authorities to go out and buy stuff at the speed of relevance. Yep. You need the right technology, and then you need the right con op. Right, and if any of those 4 things, con op, tech, funding, and then acquisition approach, and if any of those 4 things aren't present, you're not going to be able to modernize the force, right? And so you think about it with respect to unmanned maritime, the one big beautiful bill $45 billion in maritime related things. 10% of that was dedicated to unmanned. Yeah. So there's real money into the system now, right? Acquisition approach, like I said, we were one of the first programs that successfully transitioned from DIU into a Navy program of record. Yeah. So I think there's a model there that works, right? Technology, I think we both would say that the technology is maturing to the point now where you get it in the hands of the warfighters and you see what will work. I think those three things are all here. Yeah. Question now is the CONOP. Yeah. Right. And what is the CONOP going to be and how is the CONOP going to operate? But there's enough of a presence, I think, around that where I think you're going to see a really transformative stage. Yep. Right. And so then the question, and I think about it for my own company, is like, how do we think about that? Right. As the largest military shipbuilder, where we're operating, key elements of what I'll call, or what the Hudson guys will call the core fleet. Yep. Right? Yeah, Brian Clark. Yeah, right. It's great. I think Brian's got a great framework for thinking about that. As we think about the core fleet, and then you lay on top of that, a missile-centric force or RAS-centric force, right? What I need to do, right, my job as sort of EVP for Maritime Systems and Corporate Strategy is, how do I make sure we're producing the core fleet faster? And then as folks bring in a missile-centric force and a RAS force, what's my role in that and contributing to that force? Yep. And then what's my role in making sure folks who are also contributing systems, like you all, can integrate with the things that I already make? Yeah. You know what I mean? And then how do we make sure it all connected, and how do we make sure it fights, and how to make sure it delivers on behalf of the warfighter? Yep, and that's our fleet architecture. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit to some current events and some international discussions. You guys have announced that you're working with, I think, a Korean partner recently. Mm-hmm. Yep. What's going on there? What are y'all doing specifically? And then if we zoom out, what does the American industrial base need from partners like our East Asian shipbuilders who are very good at certain things? Sure. And I think one of the things that I've been happy to be a part of is like this broader partnership strategy, right? So, and we've got several different types of partnerships. We've talked about our outsourced partners. With respect to international players, really started actually with Babcock International. Okay. So the UK firm Babcock, we announced a global partnership with them a couple of years ago. What do they do? So Babcock, think of Babcock as responsible for operating the Royal Navy's submarine force. Okay. So so whether it's at Devonport or it's at Faslane, they're the ones around submarine availability for the Royal Navy. Okay. So and then, services company. Services company, but they also do shipbuilding. So their facility in Rosyth, they make the Type 31 frigate. Got it. Okay. So from a DNA perspective, nuclear and maritime are kind of their core DNA, which is our core DNA as well. Yeah. And when AUKUS got announced, very early in that process, we recognized that to help the Australians be successful on the optimal pathway around Pillar 1, there needed to be an industry partner that they could go to that could help incorporate sort of both the U.S. and the U.K. systems. Because the way the optimal pathway will work for the Australians effectively is they're going to get VCS capability transferred to them when they're deemed sovereign ready, and then that'll then transition to a joint program with the UK around building Nessus and AUKUS. So the Australians are going to have to navigate from a regulatory perspective and from an operating perspective, both the US and the UK systems. And so early on, we realized with Babcock, we could go and help the Australians work through those sets of issues in an integrated way. And we established a joint venture in Australia called HME Defense that's kind of helping them do that. So if we take nuclear out of it, because nuclear is something that's so specialized, and we're just talking regular shipbuilding, so y'all are working with Hyundai. What? Yeah, so let me get that. So think about, so that was kind of our first international partnership thing. Then with Hyundai Heavy Industries, right? So I'm actually headed to Korea on Friday. Okay. For ongoing set of conversations with them. They're the largest shipbuilder in the world, right? We recognized early on that... Are they larger than Costco? Larger, yeah, both military and commercial. Okay, cool. So what we realized in working with them is there was a couple of opportunities to potentially partner. One, commercial shipbuilding, military shipbuilding is very different. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can't still learn from each other, right? And so we've conducted a set of shared learnings where insights from how they approach commercial shipbuilding, how they approach military shipbuilding. We just had an exchange with them 2 weeks ago where I was down at saw the photos, with them. Yeah. So and it's great when you get shipbuilders together and kind of talk about different approaches. Like there's a common language you kind of work through. So that's one area is around collaboration. Second area of collaboration, and I'll have more to talk about this next week when I'm in Korea. But we think there are certain programs we could potentially partner together.
Yeah.
And that'll be an area of focus for us. And then the third area is like, how can we work together to increase industrial capacity, right? Industrial capacity in the United States, industrial capacity in Korea. And so we're keen to figure out how to make that work. In part because we know to help the U.S. Navy and our warfighters in theater, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be a combination of our ability to operate over there as well as operate over here. And so, at some level that becomes an industry question. And so how can we work with an industry partner in Korea to help solve some of those challenges?
So what I'm inferring is there might be some sustainment support over there.
It could be. I mean, I think, they're aware they operate the facility out of Subic Bay in the Philippines. So is there an opportunity to think through?
Cerberus just took over? Or
they did a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
that's right. Cerberus had a fund where they acquired it. Knight was... This occurred when I was in the administration the first time.
Okay.
The Chinese were going to buy that facility. Cerberus came in, acquired it, and set it up. So, there could be some forward. There could be things around MRO in theater. I mean but it's the type of like, how do we get industry to industry talking about way where we can provide sort of that fulsome support to the allies, the U.S. Navy and our allies and partners as we work internationally. So those are some of the international partnerships. And there could be others, right? Yeah. So we're very mindful of the fact that we're trying to create an ecosystem, and then we've got the tech partners, right? So we talked about the work that we have with C3AI as an example, and then we've got a range of partnerships with the defense tech ecosystem too. Yeah. When we were out at DSCI, we announced our partnership with Shield AI around cross-domain autonomy. They
just launched a really cool plane earlier this week.
That is very cool. The XPAT, yes, very cool. And so I think it's that kind of industry leaning forward and together. Yeah. You know what I mean? Where we need to figure out how we can get this ecosystem to work.
A totally different topic on the angle of leaning forward. The last thing I want to ask you about is there was not an op-ed, but there was a strongly argued piece, I think in proceedings last year, saying that the problem with shipbuilding is that it's these publicly traded companies aren't incentivized to go and lean forward and invest. And I don't agree with this thesis at all. Is there any validity to it? I mean, y'all are working closely with the U.S. Navy, and if they put you on contract, you guys go execute, I think. But is there an argument there? And what, if not, what's your rebuttal?
I mean, I think just look at how we deploy capital, right?
Yeah.
And the amount we deploy capital. In our CapEx in our shipyard, if you look at our capital allocation priorities, CapEx in the shipyard is number one. Yeah. Right. And so that's what we've done. I think just you got the receipts. Kind of look at how we've deployed capital to support our shipbuilding activities, and we're focused on that. And that, I think our company is mission focused, and we're 100% making sure that we're in a place to deliver what we need to be able to deliver for the warfighter. And that's kind of the guiding principle in all the conversations we've had.
So if we step back, say you're not HII, say you're just at a generic public traded company and it becomes private, right? It's taken private. Is there anything that you might philosophically, theoretically do differently if there's not quarterly earnings reports, not K-10s going out, as much scrutiny, transparency going into the public markets?
I mean, I think broadly speaking, when you think of, I'd almost frame it up this way, right? And say, listen, in our system, you've got different types of capital focused on defense problem sets, right? So you've got, publicly traded companies, you've got late stage private capital, you've got early stage venture capital, right? Each of those types of capital will look for a different set of returns over a different period of time. You need each of those three types of capital into the system. You also need government capital to subsidize things over a much longer period of time because it's got an inherently lower discount rate, right? And so I think I would almost approach it that way and say, listen, one thing our system does really well is it attracts all that different types of capital in to address specific niche problems, right? The Europeans would love to have that, right? The Europeans would love to have a healthy late stage private capital ecosystem. They'd love to have a healthy early stage venture capital system, right? The Chinese system does not have this, right? It is a state sponsored capital system. And so I think we need to look at the fact that we've got all different types of capital providers that are willing to go work in defense problem sets. As a structural advantage we have here in the United States.
And that's, I think, one of the many reasons I agree with the argument is if the late stage publicly traded, equity was the worst type and had a much lower return, the markets would invest less in it
Right.
and move away from it. And they'd go invest in, my type of company is the opposite, right? And you go and invest in some funds that are investing in us.
That's right.
But the returns aren't that much higher. They can't be that much higher because the capital hasn't shifted.
I think across the board, to your point, both people and money is fungible.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure we're attracting both the best people and money to national security problems.
Yeah. So if to close out this segment, if you were back and I think when you were in government, you were DASD in an industrial base.
That was my first role, was the DASD for industrial base policy. Yeah.
So I've been talking with some of those offices. I think there's a lot of really interesting work going on there. Is there anything you'd be focused on if you were in a similar role now doing industrial base policy from the government?
So, let me say it a bit differently. I had the privilege of doing the 13806 executive order that looked at when I was which was like the first really strong holistic look at like the defense industrial base since the Eisenhower administration.
Yep.
And, I led that. It was great. And then I think it was like a month or two after we published it, I got pulled in to be the chief of staff for the defense secretary.
Yeah.
So, so it was one of those things where it was kind of like you had this really great meaty problem you're excited to work on, and then your job changed, which also was a great job to have, don't get me wrong. But then like your purview of things you had to focus on was like much, much broader, right? Yeah. And so my biggest personal regret, one of my biggest personal regrets when you're in government, because it's always a privilege to have the opportunity to serve your country, right? Is that, I wasn't able to, I did a lot of work around identifying what the problem was, but I wasn't able to like begin to fix things as much as I wanted to because I got pulled out of it. And so
now, do you agree with Eisenhower that the defense industrial base is the problem?
No. And so now that one of the reasons why I wanted to come back in industry was, to have the opportunity to kind of go in and because there's certain things the government can do, but there's certain things that like only industry can do. And I'm very excited now of being able to be in a role where I can go fix within industry some of the problems that I identified when I was in government.
Quick hit on current events. Any hot takes or analysis of the icebreaker deal that came out? I mean, that's outsourcing shipbuilding, right? To I guess the fins is a pretty big strategy change.
I think based on sort of the continuity of policies that have been in place, sort of I think there was an expectation that we have to get capability of the Navy in the hands of in the Coast Guard and the Navy faster, and that was a sort of problem set that was going to be addressed through the ICE pack, and so I don't think anyone was surprised by that.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. Now that the way you framed the Babson, HII, AUKUS setup, nuclear, very specialized. Icebreakers, also very specialized, right? If that could be a framework here, if something's really, really specialized, maybe it's something we consider outsourcing.
Yeah, I think again, like for me, the ordering principle always remains like, what do I have to do to get capability in the hands of the warfighter faster? Yep. You know what I mean? And if there's an opportunity to do that through international partners, then I think we should take that lens to the problem.
Yep. Okay. Lightning round. What's an underrated shipyard or maritime firm you're excited about?
So, like, again, I'm biased, right? But like,
it can't be yours or mine.
I was going to say, but I don't think we talk about our unmanned systems business enough in the role that it has.
Mission
I mean, like
systems,
you said, you think about like our unmanned systems business, the fact that we're also the largest producer of UUVs globally.
Yeah.
You don't think about it. You don't think about us in that context. But to me, I think that's an important thing, particularly as we begin to evolve kind of this conversation around what the hybrid fleet looks like and how does the hybrid force look like.
Yeah. Okay. Most important FY26 DoD program to watch?
So like you, I'm very, very, very interested in how MASC plays out.
Okay.
Because I think
for the listeners, we're competing head to head on MASC right now. So,
but I think it's also one of those things where it's important to get a lot of people on the field.
Yeah.
And because I think MASC is going to be a clear signal around how kind of the Navy wants to think about its USV force structure. Yeah. Right. And so, and I think that's good. I think it's great. And that's why it needs to be a program to watch.
An overhyped technology in the shipyard, not for like unmanned.
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it overhyped, but I think people underestimate how much work it is getting AI to work in a legacy manufacturing environment.
Yeah.
So I think people sort of look at it as an easy button. And there's portions of it where you can look at and you know, like the algorithm development around that we're working on for like machine shop optimization. Like you can begin to see what the theoretical improvements are, and that's impressive. But then to actually get all of that, it's all the tactical deck plate changes you got to put in place and you got to implement. And you got to do the work, right? But there's real work there. Yeah. And so I think as folks are on an AI journey, and I think you begin to see this now in a lot of the literature that's coming out about deployments and how this operates, right? You got to get the workflows right. You got to get the change management right. You got to get the data organized right. You know, you just got to do the work.
Yeah. You got, and I think also like you've got to apply it to really specific stuff that it's actually more efficient.
Yeah, it's more efficient. First. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then you know, there's going to be a broad set of tools, right? And then you got to figure out a way to how do you orchestrate all those tools in a unified way.
Okay, advice for next gen maritime or shipbuilding professionals.
I think what's neat about maritime is there's something in it for everybody, right? And so one thing we haven't really talked a lot about is workforce trade skills. Yeah. Right. Trade development is critical for, you know, shipbuilding. Yeah. You know, we actually run our own college. Yeah. You know, the Apprentice School. It's been around since 1919. Down at Newport News. Yeah. We also have an apprentice school at Ingalls, but the one at Newport News, 1919. You can get associate's degrees in 19 different shipbuilding trades. That's awesome. I will pay you to go to school, and then you get a job when you're done. So I think for folks who want to have that kind of impact, like a shipbuilding trade is great, right? And we need more, but we also need more engineers, right? We need more material scientists. Yeah. And then I think too, we need folks from other industries who have seen how like AI deployment or some of these other problems have worked in other manufacturing environments, and then they want to apply to shipbuilding, right? Yeah. And I think, you know, I've been lucky I've been able to bring in from my own network a lot of folks to kind of help address those problems, and it's been great.
Yeah, because you were an investment banker, right?
I was an investment banker. Was at McKinsey, for a while. Yeah. So like, but I think but again, it gets to this point that like people out there recognize we're at a moment where you can have a unique impact on a mission that matters for something for the country. Yeah. You can work on real industrial problems. And that's awesome, right? I feel lucky every day we get to go and try and figure out how to make this better.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Henry Kaiser, one of the greatest American shipbuilders in history, was not a shipbuilder at first. He was, I think he built the Hoover Dam. He was building big construction projects. Yeah, and there's I think the ability to go in and sort of say, here's how the auto industry or here's how commercial aerospace has solved this problem. Yeah. You know what I mean? And again, you got to have to get the pattern recognition right because it's not all going to be the same. Yeah. But some of it, there's some goodness there, right? And how do you apply it to help everybody go faster? Yeah, 100%. All right, where can people follow your work?
So me personally, I think you just go to our HII website. But it's
and are you recruiting for anything right now? Anything big announcement coming in Korea next week? Maybe what else?
Yeah. So I think just from an announcement perspective, you know, we're always looking for shipbuilders, right? So so we'd love to get more folks in the shipyard. But then I think more broadly, you know, it's as how do we as an industry team, right? You know, how do we work together? And it's just exciting.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Eric Chewning, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Austin. See you.